Hi and welcome back. It's been a while, but I'm just gonna be running down SQFLITE and provider in this app that I have built. So I have built a notes app. It's very simple. Its concept is very basic. So let's just pull down the debug.logs for now. So now let's just say go shopping or whatever. Go shopping, and then here we create a note. Now if we click on this note, we can do whatever we want. We can start saying buy milk. We can say buy veggies and things. And we can change different aspects of this. We can change the font style. We can make it bold. We can make it italic. We can make it square. We can do whatever we want with it. Change its color. Deselect it and then change its color. There we go. But yeah, so it's a very basic notes app. Save it, finish, and here you see go shopping, blah blah blah, and it has all our updated items. Now when we add another note, let's say hi or whatever, it gets added in real time, and if we just do a hot restart, you will see that the state and the notes are preserved with SQFLITE. So let's run down how that happens. So the first thing in any app that you're making, let's say you're making a book app, you would want a model. You would want a stencil of what each book item should contain. Like I have for what each note item should contain. I have a note model. Now this is not a very the methods I have used are not very efficient, but they're very basic and they get the job done. So each of my notes should have an ID. They should have some HTML content that can be rendered by the HTML editor. They should have a created ad so that the user can see when it was created and all. It should have a title and it should have a color index, a gradient color index. This is just for the UI. So then we pass it into the constructor. And then we create factory. We create a factory called note from JSON because in SQFLITE we're gonna have to change some JSON into our note model. So I will show you later, but some JSON data which is coming in as a map will be coming in, and we need to convert that into a note. So this is how you do it. And if you want to convert it to JSON that can be saved by SQFLITE, you create a toJSON function. And just remember, so a factory, whatever you're doing, if it's a book app, it's a book.from JSON. Map string dynamic, it's always a string dynamic usually. And then JSON, and then you return a whatever you're returning. Like I'm returning a note. If you're making a book app, it's a book. Recipe app, it's a recipe. Blah blah blah. And all these items inside the square brackets need to be the same as the ones you've passed into the constructor. ID, title, created at, content, gradient, color index. There should not be spelling errors. These are strings. That means you cannot see any real-time errors until you run the app with string. Anyways, so once you have a model set up with a from JSON and a to JSON, we can start with the SQFLITE. Firstly, you want to have SQFLITE in your project, so you head into pubspec.yaml and you import SQFLITE. And also you need provider as well. You need the latest versions of both of them. So now when we head over into our SQFLITE, here we have a final string. Of course, first import a provider. Just import SQFLITE and SQFLITE API.dar. Now the first thing you do is outside of the class, which usually is named whatever you want to save helper. So I want to save notes helper. So here, final string table name. Now if you're making, this is essentially what the table is going to be called. So if you're making a books app, this should be called books. Recipe app, this should be called recipes, or whatever you want. And then you're gonna, whatever values you pass into the constructor here, ID, content, created at, title, color index, you're gonna do the same here, but instead you're gonna have a column following before it, trailing it. So final string column ID, which is set to ID, and again these strings need to be the same as the ones in the model. So column ID, column title, column created at, column content, column color index, and these must be the same: created color index, content, created at, title, ID. Now, in our notes helper class, we first instantiate an instance of this. What am I saying? We create a database, a static late database, because this will not be set in the beginning. You can't just set this to something in the class itself. You need to set it in a future, as we do here. We'll come to that later. Then you create a static instance of this notes helper, and you say notes helper.create instance followed by a factory notes helper, where you set this to be a created instance, and then you return that. And then future database get database async. This returns a database, and what async and await do, any function that's marked as an asynchronous functions allows you to run any other commands that may take time. For example, initializing the database will not be done instantly. There needs to be some sort of time before the code below it can run. So we await for this, and then we return the database. Then we need to initialize the database, my bad. So again, its return type will be a future database, and its name initialized database. This is again an asynchronous because we need to await to get the database's path. So the first thing you need to do is create a directory, and this directory is going to be awaited, and it's going to be a get database's path. And then you're going to create a path with a concatenated string with the directory plus whatever you've named your table name .db. I've named mine note, so it's going to be note.db. Then we're going to have a database that's a var database that's going to be an await open database. First you put in the path, so this requires a few arguments. It needs a path, it needs a version, and it needs an onCreate. So a path, version, and an onCreate. Now the onCreate is a function, so it takes in a database and a version. The version we won't really use, but you get the idea. Then here we write SQFLITE. So first, before writing the SQFLITE, we do db.execute, and then here we pass in SQFLITE. So we first put in three, in Dart, we put in three, I believe these are single quotes, if I'm not wrong. It's just, yes, single quotes, essentially. And what they allow you to do is write multi-line strings. So here we write some SQFLITE. Create table name, and the $sign essentially allows you to put variables that may change in the string. So if we mess up, we won't be able to mess up the spelling, because this is coming from the variable here, note. So then we put in some brackets here that end in the bottom. We put in a case of curly brackets. So in the first, we pass in all of our data. We pass in the ID, title, created at, content, color index, followed by their type. So the column ID is a text, and here also it's a string. So it'll be a text in SQFLITE. The column title is also a text, and it cannot be null. The created at is also a text, and cannot be null. The content is a text and cannot be null. But the column color index is an integer, and then you close the brackets followed by the 3 quotation marks, and then you just return the database. Picking up where we left off here, we're going to start with a bit of functions that we will be using to improve user experience in the app. So first off, we want to get the notes from SQFLITE and display them on the screen. So we create a future that returns a list of whatever you're trying to return. So in my case, I'm trying to get notes. If you're making an app, just put in the model that you're using there, because that's what you're trying to return, and name it get notes. Now this needs to be an asynchronous function, because obviously we're going to be using the database, and the database requires an await because it doesn't happen instantly. Anyway, so in the first line of this function, I've created a list of notes. And this is empty, and we set it later. We set it later in the function. And then we create a variable called database, which awaits this .database. And if I press on this, you will see that this is why we have this future database here. So we can use it in other parts of our helper, SQFLITE helper. And then you create a result variable, which is essentially just sending a query of this table name. So the table name is the variable we have created up here, and that's why we have this variable instead of typing the string name by hand. So here we have the table name, and then we order it by one of these items. And so I've ordered it by created at, and if you see created at is here. I could have just changed this to be $sign column created at, but you know, it's the same thing. So yeah. And then this desk here in all caps means descending in SQFLITE. So that means the first item that has been created is going to be on the top, and the last item that was created is going to be on the bottom. And then we iterate through this result, and we create a variable called a note info, and we see that's why we're using from JSON, because this, what do you call this element here, is a map, and this note from JSON lets us convert this map into a model. So we're gonna make that, we're gonna say note from JSON this element here, and then we're just gonna add it. We're gonna add it to the list, append it to the list, and then we're gonna return that list so that we can display it on the home screen. And let's go over some basic SQFLITE functions like inserting. First, we just put in what we want to insert. So here I am passing in a parameter because in the home screen where we are adding the node, I have to pass in the parameters that the user wants for this node. So the title, the content. And what that lets us do is here when we add node, we can pass in this created node here. That's why I am using that over here in this insert node. So then again, it's common for most functions. You're going to have to create a DB variable that awaits the database function we created. And then here in this case, we're going to insert. So we're going to do var result equals await db.insert table name dot comma note dot to JSON. Now this converts the note that we are putting in here. So this note, this created note here, into a map that can be read by SQFLITE. And then I'm just printing the result here just to for debugging purposes. Like I think we can delete that. Well, let's just keep that in for now. And deleting a node. Now this is very straightforward. And instead of passing in a note here, I'm passing in an ID. So what we do here is we say, then again, this is common for all. var result equals await delete table name where, and this is why I'm using the ID, where the ID equals a quotation mark, and then the where args, which is essentially what will be replacing this quotation mark. Where args is ID, and then we're printing the result. So that is if I want to delete a node that I don't want. Let's just run this app, and I will be right back. Alright, welcome back. So yeah, let me just show you. So this is the app. As you can see, the nodes that I created last time are still here. So I can click on this delete icon and it says delete, and the node goes away. And now when I press R, hot reload, the capital R, it's not there anymore, and that's because it's not in SQFLITE anymore. So that's the entire point of using that. Anyways, now this get node by ID. Now this you will find useful in many situations. Maybe when, let's say here, for example, when I press on this node, it takes me to a page. And now in order for this page to show the content and everything, the editor page must know which node ID it's looking at, which node it's looking at. And for that, it gets its ID, and from there it checks which one it's trying to get, which node it's trying to get, and renders the content specifically. So how to do that? Final db equals await database var result, and this is the same as in the delete node, but instead of delete, it's query. We're trying to get. Query is essentially getting data from SQFLITE. So table name where ID equals that, and where args is that. And here we do an if check. If the result is not empty, we're going to be returning a note of from JSON. So this is to make it turn it from a map of strings and objects into a note. Otherwise, we're going to be throwing an exception. Where is this used? In the note editor screen here. What we do is we I have a created node here, and this is essentially a helper. We instantiate a helper class in this page so that we can use all the nodes helpers, all the nodes, what do you call it? So we can use all the SQFLITE functions. What am I saying? So we're gonna be getting this, and here loaded node, we get node, and then I use a stream builder so that we can see the data, and I convert this loaded node into a stream so that everything works smoothly. And that's the basics of SQFLITE. And now let's run through provider. So provider is essentially a state management package. And how do you use it? Well, first you need to have it in your pubspec.yaml, of course provider. And then in your main.dart, you need to wrap your material app widget in a change notifier provider. And you're going to pass in this create function, context, and here I will be showing you what this is in right now. So in provider, I have a package called notes_provider, and its name is notes. Essentially, this lets me this lets me manage the state in my app from one file. So we have a list of notes that we just put on the top, and then we get these notes and we spread it out. We use these 3 columns, it's 3 dots, which spreads it out. So return, and we return that. And then here we just right, so I have just created this in order to I think create an ID for the node, I believe, if that's correct. Interesting. I'll have to see what that does in a minute. Anyways, so here we have a nodes helper, and here we have an add node. And now what this does is we do nodes.add node, and then we hit our SQFLITE for that to happen. And then we notify listeners. This means anything that listens onto this provider will change, will have its state updated. So essentially the main.dart, which gives it a change notify provider. There we go. There's not really much to explain in provider because I don't really build upon it as much as I don't harness the full power of provider. It's a very basic app, so I didn't really find anything to explain. It's just notify listeners, having functions such as delete node and blah blah blah. It's not really the most complex thing. Now, how would you render out the SQFLITE data? Well, firstly, what you want is in the place where you want to render them. First, we initialize the database in the init state method. For those of you who don't know the life cycle of an app, init state is essentially the first function that's called when the screen is rendered. So the first thing we do when the screen is rendered is here. I have an instance of the notes helper in this file, which I have created up here. And what I do is I initialize the database, and as soon as that ends, I print init, and then I set this note. So this is a future list of notes to helper.get notes, so that we can render this variable as a future builder, I believe. Yeah, as a future builder and as a list. So once that's done, we do notes.then value for each. Now let me just explain. What we're doing here is this is a future list of nodes. This means this is null as when the screen loads. There is nothing here. And what we do, because we can't render this as a list just like that, what I do is I create another variable that's actually just a list of nodes, and nodes.then value. Now this value is, I believe it is a list of nodes. So now what we can do, we can just add, we can increment through each of these lists, each of these nodes, and we can add them to this one variable. I hope that makes sense. And then when that's complete, we set state so that the UI refreshes. So essentially what we do now is we just, if I can find this, code is very cluttered. Yeah, a future builder list of nodes. So the future is that future list of nodes we've created up there, the underscore nodes. The builder returns a context and a snapshot. So the snapshot is an asynchronous snapshot of a list of nodes. So now what we can do here, if the snapshot has data, we can show a list view. And the thing about this is that the list view cannot take in a future. It cannot take an asynchronous list of nodes. So what we do is we map this data. So we do snapshot.data, and this exclamation mark is here because of Dart's null safety. Snapshot.data.map, and then this is E. Now this is a node, and this is each node that we're going to see in the app. So now with this, I can access different aspects of the node. I can get its ID. Let's go to a different place. Yeah, see here, e.content. As you can see, it autocorrect, it autofills for me. E.title, etc., etc. So yeah, it's very intuitive, and it's very simple, and that's more important. It's very simple. We can just map this data, and then we're done, and then it just renders out what we see here. Boom. So that's it for this. I hope you've understood SQFLITE as much as I could explain it. I'm not very good at explaining, but I hope you got a little bit of insight on how I built this app. Now, one thing I'll tell you, the code is horribly cluttered. It's everywhere. It's not very well organized, but it works. It works, and if you ever need anything that has to do with something like this, then yeah, if this is a very common tactic used in many apps that require local storage. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again later.